For question number 19, I could do this one two different ways. I could actually factor this, but instead I'm just going to get 4 cosine squared x by itself. So 4 cosine squared x is going to equal, move my 1 over to the other side, so I'll add 1. Next I'm going to divide by 4. Cosine squared x is going to equal 1/4. Now I'm going to take the square root of both sides. So the cosine of x now equals plus or minus. Square root of 1 is 1, and the square root of 4 is 2. So I'm going to have two different values I have to look up in the cosine slot. I have to look up the positive 1/2 and also the negative 1/2. So we would now look up on our unit circle, and the values, remember, we're looking up are the cosine of 1/2 and the cosine of negative 1/2, and cosine is the first slot. So we're going to have pi over 3. We are going to have 2 pi over 3. We are going to have 4 pi over 3 and 5 pi over 3. And to speed it up, I'm just going to write x equals, and you could just string those together with commas. So pi over 3, 2 pi over 3, 4 pi over 3, and 5 pi over 3. Question number 20 is a little different than all the other ones that we've done. In this case, we have two different trig words. So we need to get rid of one of these words. I'm going to get rid of sine squared. And to do that, I'm going to use the Pythagorean identity, which is sine squared plus cosine squared equals 1. So if I want to take out this sine squared here, sine squared is going to equal 1 minus cosine squared. So this cosine squared would come over to the other side, and this is what I'm going to replace sine squared x with. So all of that is going to be 1 minus cosine squared, and now I put my x in there. So this replace sine squared x, and now I'm just going to continue with equals 3 cosine squared x. From this point, I have to get my cosine squareds on the same side. They're positive on the right, so I'm going to move the negative cosine squared x over to the right side by adding it. So I'm going to add cosine squared x, and that will give me 4 cosine squared x, and I'll have 1 over on the left. At this point, I'm going to divide by 4, and I'm just going to take this cosine squared x and write it over on the left side because it's a little easier to work with. So cosine squared x is going to equal 1/4. To get rid of my square, I'm going to take the square root of both sides. And that will leave me with cosine x equals plus or minus. The square root of 1 is 1, and the square root of 4 is 2. And again, I have to look these values up on the unit circle. And you might recall that we just looked up the same exact ones for question 19. So I'm just going to write in my final answers here, which are going to be x equals pi over 3, x equals 2 pi over 3. X could also be 4 pi over 3. And then last, x could equal 5 pi over 3. And instead of writing x every time, you could have just gone x equals and put commas between all of those.